my friend Greg, or well, we're not friends technically yet. We met literally just 5 minutes ago. But my guest, Gregory Phillips, has joined the show. How you doing, buddy?
Pretty good. How about you?
Serious. As you can tell, I've been very serious the whole time we've been here, or something to that effect anyway. So how's life been treating you this year so far?
Pretty good. Just been a good start to the year. Exciting times with my my new novel, and just enjoying the ride.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah. So okay, let's get to know you. So for those people that don't know you, you're Greg. What do you write?
I write fiction. My latest novel is, there we go, A Season in Light, which is a story of passion, ambition, and escape set in the colorful, artistic underworld off Broadway in New York City. And it came out almost a year ago now. It was April of last year, and it's been pretty good. Very well received. Won a couple awards, so it's been fun.
We'll get to the wonderful recognition part of this in a second. I just got this seedy underworld of Broadway just intrigued me when I heard that. So yes. Was this? Is there like a personal experience to that, or is it just like
a bit of a personal experience? So I'm a dancer. I've danced professionally both where I live in Seattle and some in New York City. Danced in a couple of off-Broadway shows while I lived there, and I just loved the world of not the Broadway backstage, the big theaters, but like you said, the seedy little off alley theaters where people are just kind of struggling to make a living as a performer, and just the backstage drama and camaraderie and all of the stuff that goes on with all of that. It just fascinated me, and I wanted to put it into a novel.
Okay, so that means you like intimate theater settings then. Like when you were performing, you didn't. I'm sure, like from like an ego standpoint, a big audience coming to see you and then like yes.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of performing, then you probably enjoyed the little audience with a smaller, more intimate audience, because at that point you can literally see how you can with a big audience you can feel the emotion in the air, but you don't always get that. You don't get as much personal one-to-one. You get some, but it's not the same. Whereas in a theater, you can get a real rapport with your audience.
Oh yeah, you're making eye contact with people in the audience, and playing to them even directly when you can feel their energy. It's a very different feel.
Yeah. So it sounds like there's a soft spot. Is there a particular theater you really loved performing at, or did you going to?
Honestly, I can't even remember the names of the theaters, because they're literally these small little places, like down in the basement under a restaurant. You never know there was a theater on.
Oh yeah.
They're all over the place in New York City, and I love that.
Yo, I think all big cities have this. Like when I was living in Vancouver, it wasn't theaters so much; it was bars. Like bars would be like these little places you would never expect. Like I didn't think anything could survive there. And you go inside, it's like this whole other secret world. That's your appeal. You enjoy there's like worlds within worlds.
Oh yeah, I love that. And as a fiction writer, those worlds within worlds are something that you even create those as you're writing, and the layers of nuance of these places and these characters. It's one of the great parts of writing fiction.
Well, I think it's just real. I mean, why are me here? I got sick at the beginning of January, and I've had this cough. It's a little nagging cough, and it's all that's left. Like I've been fine every other way, but this little cough refuses to go away. Right? It's like the cockroach of cold; just will not die. Yeah. Right? It just will not die. So I'm sorry about that. No, what I think the thing is though, I've traveled a lot, and you probably have done the same based on you mentioned New York and Seattle, so you've been around, and you notice when you go to a place where even right now I'm in Canmore, Alberta, and Canmore has got its own little history, and you can kind of feel it. It's a small-ish town. It's no longer quite a small town, but it's not a city yet either. It's somewhere in the middle. But you can feel it. Everyone's got a story. Everyone's got a place. Everything's got these layers, and then there's all these little neat little connections. Big cities have it too, but the thing about big cities is you got two things. There's time. Cities, cities don't get big overnight. They get big over an extended period of time. So there's always these. So there's some places that are brand new, built up. They're just there. They're the advertised places and all that other wonderful BS that we all know. It's like, hey, marketing. You're like, God damn, no. I'm just here because it's right. But then you go to like into the heart of these cities, and you're like, though some of these buildings are like hundreds of years old in some cases, and you're like, this is cool. Like lots happen here, and you can almost feel it. Yeah. Right? Big cities have that, but the thing about big cities is because so much has happened in these places. There's almost like histories within histories within histories that are forgotten. And it's so cool.
Yeah, yeah. There's a passage in the novel that's one of my favorite things. One of my favorite little scenes that probably not everybody picked up on. So there's really two narratives told in this story. One is present day, and one is from the 1980s. And I set just a rehearsal scene in the same studio in one in the 1980s and then in present day, and didn't line that out just to see if readers would pick up on that. Oh, this is the same thing happening in the same place 30 years apart. And there's so many places like that where the room itself in a place like New York City tells its own story.
Yeah, and that's everywhere. Like, folks, if you ever travel, if you ever go out and about and you see something, sometimes you're only passing through. Mm-hmm. And I know what that feels like a lot. But sometimes if you're there, you get to really see. Again, you can literally see like there's so much happened here, right? Yeah. And so many cool things. One of my favorite like all-time places, it was a bookstore called City Lights in London, Ontario. Old building. There's like this creak in the floor. Like just one of those like little things you always walk by to get to the science fiction center, you just hear a thunk. It's like, oh wow, okay, it's like a really cool, like it's something completely distinct to that building and to that place.
Yeah.
Right. Also had a really kick-ass science fiction section, and I kind of miss it. But I mean, that's me. But I mean, I'm a nerd. What can I say? But the thing about that is, right? But it's true. Anywhere you go, I should ask, like, has there ever been a room that's like you walked into and you looked at and just said, "Holy shit, this is a cool place."
Oh yeah, all the time.
Anything in particular, or?
I think of a like you mentioned the bar scene in Vancouver. I think of this bar that I walked into in New York City, where I just was walking by on the sidewalk, heard some jazz inside, walked in there, and it was like it had this smell to the room. That was not a negative smell. It was not like a bad bar smell, but it was like the walls were. It was like it was alive with the history of this building, and it seemed like it was probably a building from the 1800s. Just the manner of the construction, and there was this phenomenal jazz happening inside, just on something like a Tuesday night randomly, and yeah, I distinctly remember all the details of that place, because it really, the room stood out to me, that it was drawing this energy, almost out of the walls.
Yeah, which is always cool when you go to a place like that. Yeah. So I guess, okay, so I'm assuming now let's get to like the big and cool stuff. Like,
yeah,
this book has gotten like some cool awards. You've been recognized that way, which is always, like, I know this just for my own, it's a heck of like oh my gosh, someone noticed me, and then it's like, that's cool, right? Yeah. It's an honor to be known. Did you win?
Yes. So for the first award it won was called the Summerset Awards, and it's put on by Chanticleer Reviews, and it is for contemporary fiction, and it won the grand prize in that contest I think it was last summer. So that was very, very cool. Just an honor to be recognized that way. And then very recently, just last month, it was named the Book of the Year by the Right Review, which is a very well-known book review company. And I mean, just the books that were on the list, it was just an honor to be on that list. But then to win that award, or win Book of the Year for 2021, was again really an honor, and just really validating to me as a writer. Because you're always, when you publish a book, you're putting yourself out in a way. It's a vulnerable thing to do, and so for it to be well received and recognized like that is just means a lot.
Well, it's also just so when did you know, like, were you going for the nomination, or did they just come to you one day and say, "Hey, you were nominated"? Because that's cool both ways.
It was each different for each one. The Summerset Awards, I entered. It was a literary contest. I submitted my book as an entry, and then it went through all the rounds of judging and so forth. The Right Review, it came more as a surprise. It was just, I mean, I knew that it had been reviewed by the Right Review, but I did not know that it was up for that award.
So then you get an email, probably like, "Dear finalist," and you're like, "What? How did this happen?" I speak a little bit, like, this podcast was nominated for the Auroras in Canada a few years ago. And it's like, I never planned it. It was just, it happened. Right. And I think that's the best kind of recognition, to be honest with you. I mean, I think probably the best thing as a writer is when you get a reader coming to you, "I really dug your book. It changed," like, the rare "it changed my life" thing is like the ultimate compliment. But the second coolest thing, and honestly, those are the highs I think any author should realistically go for, because this is the thing, like, I'm not trying to belittle any award, because again, awards are accomplishments and recognition, but you didn't do it for that kind of recognition. You did it because
you do it for the reader.
You did it for the reader. And I think those awards are cool, but they should not be your end all be all goal.
Yeah, no, the comment, you're right. The comments from readers, that's the best part. That's when the readers say how much they connected with the characters or the story. That's really the best kind of validation.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is your newest one. How many books have you done prior to this?
2 others. So my first novel was called Love of Finished Years, and my second novel was The Exile. And then this is my third one, A Season in Lights. Okay. And I'll give a little plug. You can go to my website, GregoryEricPhillips.com, and find links to order all of them if you're interested.
Okay, I'm going to pretend I'm a professional here for just a minute. Gregory, what? Gregory what?
It's Gregory Eric Phillips, and Eric is spelled ERICH.
Okay, that's what I was about to ask, because
did
I do it right? Like I said, I'm a trained professional, as you can tell.
Yep, that's it.
Woohoo! Score. I almost know what I'm doing. Don't tell me. Right? Okay. So I guess I'm gonna go backwards, and we'll work our way forwards a bit about this. So you decided that you were going to write books. What was there a book that made you go, "Oh my gosh, this is what I want to do"? Or is it something you kind of always dreamed of doing? Like, how did you stumble down this path?
So it's something I've always wanted to do. I wrote a novel when I was 14. It was terrible, but I did it. I finished it. And then, I wasn't always writing through the years since, but it was what I always wanted to do. It was an art form that I always, loved. And, I think it was my 9th or 10th book that was finally my first one to be published. And, I would have felt differently in my 20s and the early 30s, but to be honest, it was the first of my novels that was worthy of being published. The others were, I look back on them now and I see how, I was still learning my craft. I was still learning how to tell a story, how to create a character. And just like any, if you're going to learn to play an instrument, you're not going to be ready to perform on your first attempt. It's going to take years. And I think with writing, it's the same way. Granted, there are some people whose first effort at writing, gets published and becomes a bestseller. But I think more commonly, and certainly for me, all those early novels that I wrote were leading me toward the goal of where these last 3 novels I think have been, I mean, obviously they've been published. So that right there is the first validating thing of, yes, your art is now ready for the world.
Okay. So I got a lot of ways I could go with this. I think I'm going to ask this first. What was missing? Because there had to be a moment where something clicked and changed. Let's start with that. Yeah. What was the moment?
That's a great question. I think my early, I think I've always been good at just at telling characters, because that's, I think, my strength as a writer. But I think the consistency of a through line, the consistency of a voice, that's probably more it. The consistency of my voice in the books, to for it to be at a high writing level throughout. I think that some of my early efforts, there were good parts, and then parts that weren't as strong, or that weren't as clear. And so even though there were good characters, the writing craft itself wasn't as consistently polished.
Okay,
And
so
that was just a matter of practice to get.
practice is part of it. I think, because again, for me, just because I dabble in both. I'm not just traditional. I've done independent and hybrid stuff.
Mhm.
We'll go down that rabbit hole a little bit too with you, because I think
Yeah.
I feel like you've deliberately chosen the traditional math you chose for a reason, and
Mhm.
it's worth exploring. But I realized, like, I think one of the biggest things happens also with people that are really getting started with the craft. It's really easy to get trapped in our head,
Yeah.
right? It's really easy to get trapped in our head, and we have good ideas. That's not the problem. The problem is it's not just about the idea. It's about
Mhm.
connecting emotionally, establishing a
Yes.
connection to readers,
Right. Yeah.
and that's practiced somewhat too. But I think that's also deliverance. Like, it's
Mhm.
that willingness, like you're talking about, like that being published is like being vulnerable. There's a lot of truth to
Yeah.
that, because it's something that you made that you're proud of. But you're a little nervous. It's like, oh my God, what do people think this sucks? I mean, that's always in the back of your head, no
Mhm.
matter how confident. And I'm a cocky asshole, let me tell you, sometimes, right? But the thing about it is, even with that, there's always that little bit of nerve when someone's reading your stuff. It's like, is this good?
Yeah.
Right? You like, right? But I'm not gonna say you ever stop worrying about it, but I realize if I can laugh at my own really crappy jokes, if I can
Mhm.
feel something about the character's plight, if I can feel invested in my own story,
Yeah.
then chances are somebody else is going to as well,
Yeah.
right? Even if sometimes not in the way I always expect.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
think for me also, it was a I've become more of a perfectionist as I've gotten older. And I feel like my some of my earlier books, I was like, "Oh, I wrote a great story. Everybody should read it. Let me try to get it published." And th- you know, later I've much more detailed on saying, I'll tell you what A Season in Lights. I started this novel in 2015. And it came out
Okay.
last year. It wasn't good enough yet, and I knew it wasn't good enough yet. And it took more time. It took more layers on these characters, and on the story before it was ready. And I think when I was younger, it's not that I wasn't willing to put in the work for it. I was, but I didn't see it as much. I didn't see the flaws. And as I've
Oh,
gotten older, I've learned to see and even dig for the flaws in my own writing. And then and that makes me, I think, able to write a better finished product, even if it takes longer.
that's interesting. Because as I've gotten older, I've worried less about perfect. But I will tell you where, like, and I think it's we can always make our work better. I think
Yes.
that's always the thing, right? We
Mhm.
all know it deep down that as good as we have it, there's probably like we could that little inch better, that little detail better. Because again, the more you do something, the more details you see in it, the more you know. Sometimes that kind of works against you too, because
Yeah,
sometimes you're like,
it's a balance. It's a tough balance to
yeah,
strike.
yeah. So, but so oddly enough, are you a music guy like at all? Like you being into music at all? I
I am.
imagine so.
I'm a musician.
Okay, so one of my okay, this might not it'd be they're not quite they're a well known ish, but they're not like super well known. It's an album
Okay.
called Finger 11's the band.
Hmm.
They did their self titled album, which is the third one, and their producer was a gentleman by the name of Johnny K.
Mhm.
So you don't notice it. You don't notice it in the first few listens, but there's a few just flaws deliberately put into the songs.
Interesting.
For
Yeah.
example, so there's a song called Good Times. the singer busts his lip. You can hear it, like where he's bleeding a little bit, right? If you're paying attention to it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then so I had like this epiphany, because why'd you leave that in? He goes, here's the thing. If it's too perfect, you take people out of it, because
Yeah.
what happens is it feels too polished and too artificial.
Mm-hmm.
It has to feel authentic. Now, that doesn't now for those people listening, that doesn't mean I'm not doing work in terms of making my sure my shit don't stink. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying though is the end result for me, it's the best book I can do and the perfect book I can do
Yeah.
are not the same things, right?
Right.
They're
Yeah.
not the same things. So I'm going for the best book I can do.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also okay with some deliberate flaws still in the book, because again, it feels realer somehow. Does that
Mm-hmm.
make sense?
It does. It does. Yeah. I think you've got a really good point.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, maybe it's me. Like, I just like the best art I find. It's not that it's perfect.
No.
It's that it's got that perfect, it's got for lack of a better term, a perfect combination of your voice and what you care about,
Yeah.
and how you tell that story and the story itself. Because let's be honest, every story has been told. It's just how you do it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's what makes it, that's the fun.
Yeah.
And that's why Gregory Phillips is Gregory Phillips. There's only one way you can tell, only one way to tell that story from you, right?
Yeah. And there's definitely a point in time where you have to let that perfectionist inside you go and say, this is the best story, that the best book it can be, even if it's not perfect. And this is the time for it. And now it's time to just put it out into the world.
Yeah. And also, and maybe, and this is something I'm studying newsletters a little bit. I'm not afraid to suck. I know that sounds really like a, again, it sounds like I'm going the opposite direction, but I'm not. Like what he's talking about and what I'm talking about is we see details, but sometimes it's not always about all the perfect details. It's just about getting it out there. And that's kind of where we're going with that. I'm going with this anyway.
Well, sometimes, there are times too when I find that my editors will correct things that I had written for a certain way, because it maybe grammatically or or something that's not technically exactly the correct way to say this, but it's the way this character would convey it, or the way I feel the readers will understand it. And you have to be very careful with that as a writer, because but there were some times when I took some editorial comments. I was like, nope, we're going back to the incorrect way of saying this, because it conveys more meaning.
And also, I mean, I'm sure your editors respect that too, because again,
that becomes a conversation between me and the editor, because they have their job and I have my job, and you need to kind of merge.
Well, yeah, totally. But again, I'm saying like good editors will understand it. Oh, this is where you're going. Now, sometimes then what they'll do, and this sometimes is it's wonderful / annoying. They'll take it and they'll come up with a better way of doing it than what you thought about. Yeah. And you're like, why are you so smart?
Right. A lot of authors hate the editorial process. I love it, because I have learned so much about writing from my editors.
Absolutely.
Both about writing craft, but also about the good editors. They also give you, like you said, they give you ideas. In my second novel, The Exile, my editor gave me some feedback that where this kind of the antagonist character, he said, didn't have enough depth to him. He was just a bad guy, basically. We didn't quite believe all his motivation. So in the next round, I made him a failed artist, and it just completely blew this character into this thing that was so much more dynamic than he had been before. And you saw his bruised ego of that he was a painter who'd never gone anywhere with it. And that became some of the motivation for him, some of the bad things he was doing. And that idea came from it wasn't the editor's idea, but the editor put a bug in my head that from which I then came up with this idea that I think really strengthened the novel.
Well, it's also just the fact too. Now you also gave the villain, like, no real villain is all bad.
Exactly.
Even if, right, they have human qualities.
Yes.
He did his best.
And no villain thinks that they're bad. They think they're the good.
Almost always.
Almost.
Actually, the ones that think they are the bad guy are sometimes the most terrifying, because they've hit that I just don't give a shit aspect anymore. And it's like,
yeah.
Woo, right. But
yeah.
Right. But that I digress. That's something I'm working on in one of my next books. Like, no, he knows he's a bastard. He just doesn't care. It's like, oh, that's a different rule set, a different engagement, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the thing about it is, right, is most villains, even the most dastardly villains, even the ones that think they know they are absolutely the bad guy, right? Mm-hmm. But most of them, as you say, most of them don't. Most of them just think they're the hero in their own story. Like most of them, and much like we all think that on some level.
We all think we're the hero in our own story.
That's right. Sometimes we're the villain. I speak from experience there. Sometimes I am the villain. But that all said, no one's all bad. No one's all good either. And that's what makes things interesting.
And as a novelist, you have to show that. And I think one of the things that novelists sometimes do that fail, that is why their books fail to have the depth that they maybe think they have, is the other flip side of that is where they make their heroes too good and don't give their heroes the flaws or the, I mean, talking about the flaws is kind of a literary term for the hero, but it's more just giving them an ugly side.
Yeah.
Because we all have that, and making them struggle with that, and making them, deal with that they're far from perfect, even though they're the heroes of the story.
Well, it's okay. I don't know if you're a comic guy, but one of my favorite villains of all time is Venom. Venom's a very, especially in the very beginning, he is completely, now he's a little too one-dimensional, which is at the time, so I had to change him a little bit. But the first time, it's really two people, like Eddie Brock and the Venom symbiote, that are legitimately mad at Peter Parker for, one, for ruining his life, and two, for rejecting. So they think they're right to antagonize him because they have a reason to. Eddie Brock can no longer photograph for the newspaper because Peter did something to him. Now, that's not to say that Eddie didn't have his own flaws, but
in his mind, Peter is the villain.
Yeah. And Venom, the symbiote, is also was alive and tried to bond with him, and it was rejected. So it feels rejection. The creepiest thing in that first story was when Eddie Brock, because Eddie Brock knows everything about Spider-Man thanks to the symbiote, actually went up to Aunt May and was super nice to her, like ridiculously kind to Aunt May right in front of him. Because the message, it was actually one of the most heinous things in the entire book, because it was like, oh my God, anytime he wants to, he can go mess with Aunt May, and there's nothing Peter can do about it. And that's terrifying when you have a villain that one-track minded.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. But that's the flaw with Venom 2. He's a little too one-track minded. You had to, if you want to use him more than once or twice, you have to expand the depth. But as of the first time,
sure, yeah, it's a brilliant writing.
Yeah, it's like that's terrifying, right? So, but okay, so let's.
I feel like one of the things in this book, one of my challenges from first to third draft really was the main character Cammy. I felt like she needed more of a bit of a dark side, and so she kind of struggles with her internal demons throughout, and she kind of makes some selfish decisions that really hurt her family, and she comes to regret it. And and people have responded differently. Some people love her. Some people are like, I don't know about this girl, but they all the readers have had an opinion about her.
but that,
and I feel like she's a really strong character, because she's kind of one of my more, um, I would say flawed protagonists from my novels.
well, she sounds very polarizing, but that's actually but that's obviously, you know how U.S. media is in the States. It's incredibly polarizing. But the reason why it's so polarizing is it puts people into very distinct camps.
Yeah.
I like it and I don't, or I don't like it. Right? Either way, are you there? Okay, cool. You froze for a second. I was just making sure. Either way, though, it creates that reaction.
It does. And my favorite reaction to Cammie's character, which I've gotten from a lot of readers, is that they were angry at her. And I love that, because that means they loved her. But they were like, no, what are you doing? And I, as a writer, I love that response from a reader.
Yeah, no, but that's what you want, right? That emotional investment and connection is what's going to bring readers back to your books, right? The fact that you made a character, and by the way, going back to, I feel flaws is going to be the theme of this episode, just based on how we're talking, right? Our flaws are sometimes the source of our strengths too, right? It's not always okay. Now I know this will come as a shock to you, being on the show for about a half hour already, but I talk a lot, right? And that could be, I know it's a shock to us all, right? But the thing is, right, that's a good and bad. It means I'm loud. I can be loud, boisterous, maybe a little obnoxious if I let that go there. But on the other hand, because I'm always on the air, it allows me to be good at what I do. So there's a give and a take with flaws as well.
Yeah. And we're all such complicated personalities that it's never clear of this is our good side, this is our flaw, and so forth. It's always all mixed up together.
Yeah. So making a character good or all bad, right? The mustache twirling villain is fun in small dosages once in a while, because it is fun to be the bad guy sometimes.
Yeah.
But it's not real, because no one thinks like that. No, maybe I should never say never. I don't want to meet the person that thinks like that. How's about that?
Yeah. But also, a story with that kind of a villain, you already know the outcome. You know the hero's gonna win, because it's been told 1,000 times, and the story never changes. So to write a compelling story, you need to just make it more complicated and make that line between good and evil, it's fuzzy in real life, so it should be fuzzy in fiction too, because to me, fiction is a reflection, but a little bit of an augmentation of real life. You want it to mirror real life, but then you dramatize it a little bit. But if you get too far from real life, then your readers are going to lose interest.
It's when you can't connect. I will say this. I literally wrote a novel with a unicorn that farts out advertisements, rainbow style. You can be absurd. Like, you could literally,
sure. But you have to have something that connects to
absolutely
a reader's experience.
Like, what I'm talking about is, that's window dressing.
Exactly.
The core of the story has to be something people can relate to on song.
I'm guessing the unicorn was not your protagonist.
No, he was not. Although he did join the protagonist's party for a little bit, and I actually do have a little side story where, it ended up long story short, it was a digital unicorn, and it ended up being like a digipet to a little girl. And if I ever do the sequel to that, it's how she kind of takes over the mob with a unicorn and like an undead zombie mobster on her side. It's gonna be kind of fun, right? But again, that's a kooky story, and it's a little absurd. But you can but also, just based on your reaction to it, there's certain expectations I'm painting with this already. The tone is not serious. You can tell, because it's not. Right? That doesn't matter. What matters is, okay, so how can I make the little girl interesting? How can I make her interesting? What's her
little
story?
Girl, this thing might have been from her imagination. And you're connecting with that character who would have a vibrant imagination and would have this, enjoy having this kind of thing in her, in her life.
Hey Jack, how you doing? Hey Jet, how you doing too? It's like, yeah. just saying quick hello, just saying quick hello to feel free to ask Greg any questions. No, like one of the things, like yeah, you can do any story, any tone, any style you want. What it comes down to, and I would actually go, the only thing I might slightly disagree with you on, just slightly,
Sure.
right, is the fact that is this. I think expectations, you can have like you can tell a logical story start to end, and I can know what's going to happen, and still be entertained by it. It's all in how you get there.
Yes,
right?
Exactly. Yeah, and if it doesn't always have to be a surprise, but you're right. If it gets there in an interesting way, that will, or if it's just the character's emotional journey toward that point that is coming anyway, that can still be very compelling.
Yeah, like that's like good storytelling is, it's about it's like the situation, whatever it is, whether it's good versus ego, or protagonist antagonist, or great disaster, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
Who is this character in this moment? And you can make them heroic or villainous or cowardly, or right, as long as the reader can understand how they get there. That's the important part. The rest of it, I almost would say, is irrelevant. Almost. Like, obviously there's the journey is part of the magic as well. But if you have a clear idea of who your characters are, where they're going, how they're getting there, that's the truly compelling thing.
Yeah.
So, Cam, your favorite character that you've ever put together so far?
Actually, my favorite character is Tom, who's Cammie's love interest in the novel, and Tom is a little bit older than her, and so I mentioned earlier, the narrative has a present day and then the 1980s. And so the 1980s section revolves around Tom. And so he's in both periods of time in the novel. And he's a character that he's fairly quiet, although he has a couple moments where he kind of goes off a little bit, but mostly he's fairly quiet and just has this depth to him that I feel like came through without me having to really overly describe it. Just watching him, how he behaves in the novel, if people really responded well to him, and I feel like it was. I really enjoy the way his character came together. So I would say he's really kind of my favorite character that I've done.
He sounds fascinating. So he's your favorite. So I guess going back to something we talked about, again, we've been going about flaws and things of that nature. Was that, like you said, you always said you've been good about characters. Like, as the time has gone on, then have you, like, when you started, like, did they become more three-dimensional as time went on with you, as you've done more and more books, or you said this was your strength?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I think even in my early unpublished books, I think that my characters had a pretty good depth, but it was that I perhaps didn't know how to convey that without being obvious about it early on. And I think I've grown better at conveying it. It's the classic show don't tell thing that is, such a rule of, that's where I've improved. But I think also just, through life, I'm very observant. I kind of just watch people and am interested in people and interested in seeing as layers upon layers of people become clear. And so the more I've written, the more I've been able to kind of put that into the characters in my stories.
That's cool. We got a couple more places I'd like to go. I get the feeling you're working on, I'm sure you're working on your next book right now. Right. I'm sure you're working on it right now. So how long does it take you to write a book on average?
Boy, there's no average, because everyone is its own situation. So my first novel was 15 years from first draft to published book.
Okay.
I wasn't working on it that whole time, but I wrote it, and then I, brought it back after about 10 years, rewrote it. so it's never that I'm just working on one thing at a time, or usually not. So then after that novel came out, or even once that novel was kind of in the process of toward publication, I started The Season and Lights. I put it aside for a while and then wrote The Exile, my second novel, which took a couple years only. That was my fastest one. And, some authors would say 2 years is not fast at all, but for me, that's pretty fast. And then I came back to The Exile, or it came back to A Season of Lights. So I would say generally, oftentimes the first draft will be about a year, but then I need to kind of let it sit for a while and come back to it and, with fresh eyes. And so, I have another novel that I wrote a first draft to, finished actually about a year and a half ago, and I'm dabbling in it now again, but it's where, like I said earlier, I'm able to see where some of the flaws in the story are, and so I need to kind of do a deep dive to fix that before I can really move forward with that project. But I think that taking a year or so off from a manuscript is really valuable, and something that for me as a where there's not pressure on me to come out with the next book every 6 months or every year. I have that luxury that I can, and also my books they're stories that I feel are more timeless, that they're not, it has to come out right now. Although interestingly, with The Season and Lights, sort of a shift of topic, it became much more timely by the end. Whereas if I'd published it when I first wrote it, it would not have been as strong of a novel. So that was an interesting thing. So yeah, it's all over the map, but I would say probably for me, 2 to 3 years is
a good average. Okay, because I was going to ask an interesting question actually, because I this is just me. Maybe just maybe different things, different folks. I find after about a few months, sometimes I will look. I mean, you do want a little bit of what the heck did I write here?
Yeah,
but you want a little bit of that. I get to the point. It's like, oh, I wrote this. Holy crap!
I did that too. Yeah,
yeah, like right. And I feel like. So are you a Terry Pratchett fan by any chance?
Yes.
Okay, so I love his commentary on The Carpet People. Right. And the commentary he wrote about it was, when I was doing this book, like, would this be the book I do today? No. But I had to also respect 14-year-old Terry Pratchett, because that's when he first wrote the first draft of that novel. Right.
Yeah.
Right. So he recognizes that our voices change as authors.
Yeah.
Right. What I know there are some things I always care about, because like I said, I am the dude that writes about unicorns and fart rainbows and plays croquet. Alice plays croquet in Underworld, Jason the Argonauts, because I love that little bit of absurdity. I think that's never going to completely change. But what I care about does.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things I always worry about with a story is I almost feel like I have only a short window to write it.
Yeah.
If that makes sense? Because otherwise, I lose the voice. And once you lose it because you evolve, you almost can't get it back. If that makes sense.
Yeah. I see what you're saying. I haven't really faced that too much.
Okay.
I think though honestly, for me, I look back at some of those old novels I wrote, say 10, 12 years ago, and it's a voice I wouldn't want to publish today in some cases.
Yes. Oh no, absolutely.
And so then I start to think, well, do I want to resurrect this story and rewrite it in today's voice? Or is it better to just use it as a learning experience and write something new? Like the novel that I'm working on that I first wrote a couple of years ago, I see that is a slightly different voice from me today, but I like it because it's where I was back then. And so, but it's recent enough that I can recognize that, remember, and still work with that.
Yeah. Well, no, I was just going to say, like, the answer to what your first thing, do I go and rewrite in today's voice or make something new? The best answer is almost always to make something new, because you can't, there is one thing that voice has over you. It's not necessarily technical skill. It's the enthusiasm of that idea.
Right.
You can't duplicate that. You just can't.
Yeah.
So
yeah, if that book had come out in 2008 and had a publication date of 2008, I could look back and say that was great. I did that back then with that voice. But publishing that today with a 2022 publication date and saying this is me, I wouldn't want to do that.
No, you'd be like, nah. It's like nope. But yeah, and going almost full circle here. That was actually when I had my epiphany about perfect. Ironically, Jag read one of my novels, and she gave me some much needed feedback to it, and I appreciated that. But it's also like at the same time, it's like that was the best I could do at the time.
Yeah.
Now, would I do it again? Because I'm older and we'll say wiser. We'll give
you the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah. Give me the benefit of the doubt. All right. We'll say wiser. But I mean, but again, I think it's part. I think part of the process. Like again, I don't worry about perfect. I worry about changing and becoming better, because that's all we can do at the end of the day, right? And we'll see what kind of mold I create on the Play-Doh, right? Probably when it's all said and done, they're just gonna go up behind me and just like delete the damn thing because like never again, never ever again, right? But that's okay, right? That journey is important, and actually a weird thought. Maybe we'll see what you think about that. Every story you tell, even though like some of them will never see the light of day, they're a reflection, I think, of your own progress also as a person.
Absolutely. Well, I think of my novels sometimes almost like my own form of journaling, because I don't put a lot of my own experiences in stories. I mean, A Season of Lights, I put some of my theater experiences, but it was not direct. It was, influenced by my experiences, but not, exactly what happened.
Oh, yeah.
But as far as the ideas in the stories, I feel like that is where I've journaled almost through my whole life through my stories. And so I enjoy looking back at some of these manuscripts from when I was, 25 and reading what some of the characters were saying and realizing that's what I was thinking back then. And that's beautiful to have that record, because it was how I was working through some stuff at the time and working toward becoming the person I am today. So yeah, I think being a writer it does change how you are, how your perspective in the world is.
Yeah. Hold on a second here. She's just giving me a response there. So I highlight as part of the show. No, I tend to agree. I can recognize pieces I have my first novel, the one I wrote way back. Like I wrote a novel in high school. I think this is a common theme. We know what we're supposed to do when we're younger. I read it now, and there are parts of me it's like, ooh, I was a cocky son of a bitch back then. All right, oh man, I was almost like a sword, but how sharp I was of some of the things I said then, and it's like now I'm like I'm a little softer. I'm a little, hey, let's all get along, because really you come to a certain point in life, you just like, who gives a fuck? Like really, who does, right? And you come to that point. You still have those little moments here and there when you're younger. It's like, okay, good, you were good here, Josh. Sometimes you're like, or you were good here, Greg. Now sometimes when you read it, it's like, okay, I'm not sure what you were thinking here. Bad Greg, bad Josh. Like what? Right? That's how it goes. That's how it works. And but again, we all learn. We all grow.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, time to get to the last one. Now you've chosen. I mentioned this because in today's publishing industry, there's crowdfunding, there's traditional, there's niche traditional, there's indie, there's, although probably not to the same love, NFTs. Basically, storytelling is from an accessibility point of view is easier now than it's ever been.
Absolutely.
So my question is, why did you choose the path you chose?
So, for anybody listening in, my books would be published with what you would consider indie publishers, which are traditional publishing, but smaller presses. And to me, what I like most about that is the collaborative aspect between you and the publisher. That it's really a partnership where you for the publisher, they don't succeed unless you succeed. Whereas with one of the huge publishers, they don't really care. They're just like, they'll throw the books on the bookshelves and see what sells, and they're not fully invested in you as a writer. Whereas I feel with the indie presses, they are. And that's, I think, what I like most about it. I also like that it is technically a traditional publisher. It's not a hybrid or self-publishing. And for me, that's important as to prove to me that it's worth being published. Not whereas, I could have self-published some of my earlier books, on with a hybrid publisher where I'm basically, paying them to publish it.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of wanted for myself to have that gatekeeper of saying, does somebody else believe that they can, make this successful in the marketplace? So those are really the two main reasons why, for me, indie presses were the way to go.
See, I would actually call what you're doing. I would actually call it's actually traditional publishing.
It is traditional.
Yes. I would call it niche publishing.
Okay. Yeah.
I would call it niche publishing because what it is, you have a very specific audience you tailor your work to. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with that. That is actually a really smart way of doing business, if we're being very, very honest.
I'm actually not sure I would say quite that for my books. It's, and this is another reason why the small presses work for me, because I want to feel like when I'm writing, I'm creating the best work of art I can, and I'm not thinking as much about, does this fit my readership? And so the readership then found me. So, whereas if you went with a big press, then once you get a reputation for this is the kind of writer you are, they want you to write that same book over and over again.
Yes,
and I don't want to be that kind of an artist, because to me that stops being art and it becomes a job.
It's okay. Like, I had to put this as a business, not as their quality of food.
Yeah,
McDonald's is the dream.
Absolutely.
If you really, as a business, it's the dream.
Yeah.
That all said,
it's not for me.
It's not for anybody, to be perfectly honest. But I mean, you know as well as I do, you go on the road, you're like, where do you go eat? Now, if you can't get like down there's Cracker Barrel, which is decent, right? And you got, like, you're on I'm talking just traveling, not the really good places that in all these, right? It's like, you don't have a Cracker Barrel, you don't. It's like, well, there's always a McDick somewhere on there, right? Like that's just a normal thing. They have that recognition and that brand and awareness that everybody knows.
Many writers have that and are very successful at it, and that's fine. It's just not the route I ever wanted to go.
No, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's about being honest with yourself. It's about being honest with yourself of what you want. I say a very important thing as a writer when you write a book, right? And where you want to go. Like, for example, I wrote an epic poem with mashed up Alice in Wonderland and Greek mythology. Really fun.
Right?
Really, it was totally like Alice plays Jason of the Argonauts croquet in the underworld. I had super fun putting to write that story.
Not a huge audience for that kind of stuff, but
Well, I see. Well, see, here's the thing. That's not actually why I made the choice I made. The choice I made came to this. I had this idea for a board game. I can't go to a publisher and go, I got a book board game combo. Let's figure this out, because the publisher will look at me like, they'll take a long drink and go, right, what are you doing here, bud? Right. Whereas but again, looking like, again, speaking as an artist, speaking as someone that's doing things, right? It's about storytelling. I can tell a story that can incorporate both creatively and successfully. I believe, right? Ergo, I'm going to choose ultimately. Like, I got the book digitally on Amazon right now, but inevitably I'm going to crowdfund. The reason why I want to crowdfund is because it serves what I really want to do with it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. And you're doing the same thing in the sense that what you're doing, right? What you're doing is very much, you want to tell stories only you can tell.
Yeah.
And you don't want to think so much about how to sell this stuff. I mean, you had to put up with me for nearly an hour, and I know that's a tough thing sometimes. Just ask Jag. But the thing about it is, right? Right. You can worry about your craft. You can worry about telling the best story possible. You still have to market a little bit. That's why, again, but you don't want to carry all of it on your shoulders.
Yeah.
Right. That's the thing, right? You don't want to carry all of it on your shoulders. So your decision was, well, I want to tell my kind of stories.
Yep.
But I don't want to go here because I don't know if I can keep telling these kind of stories.
Right.
Right. So I'm going to go here because my editors, you've got a good relationship, I imagine, with your publishing house. They like you. They like your work.
Yeah.
And I mean, Lord knows, I mean, you just said it earlier, you got 2 awards for it. So that, I mean, they must really love you because of the recognition you're getting. So it's like, that's where you are and that's where you're choosing to be. And there's nothing wrong with that, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think our hour is nearly up, good sir. So
well, this has been great.
Yeah. I hope you've enjoyed a little bit of what I do here, and you're welcome to come back anytime you want. Right. So whenever your next book comes out, feel free to come back if you want to come back for some more of my abuse. I mean, conversation here. So actually, do you mind if I ask one more thing before we go? You said you do music. So what kind of music do you do?
So I'm a pianist, and I would say safe to say former violinist now, because I haven't really practiced.
Yeah.
But I used to play violin. I've sung in choirs pretty much my whole life. So very active classical musician.
Okay, that was actually my next question. Like classical. No, violins are and bagpipes have one thing in common. They are beautiful instruments, but they must be practiced. Yes. Otherwise, they're not so beautiful. And then people, you can get people to give you money to stop. Like just don't.
Oh yeah.
Just don't.
Piano's so much more rewarding. Piano, you just sit down. It's going to sound good, and neighbors won't mind.
Which is no violins, like no violin. Nelson, there's tears, just giant sheds of tears, right? Please don't. Or if it's beautiful, I will say this about if it's really beautiful, you might get tears too, but it'll be for the opposite reason. Like the range is incredible there with the emotion you can do. But piano, what's your favorite song to play? Because these are classically trained, so
yes. My favorite song is one that actually plays a role in the novel, and there's a plot surrounding it. Is Chopin's Etude No. 3 in E major. I'm
not cool enough to know what that is. I'm sorry, brother.
If you read the book, there's one of the major themes of the novel is surrounds that piece.
Fair enough. I'll definitely take a look. So, yes, as Jag just says, very, very nice. So, real quick before we wrap this bad boy up, so let's kind of do a recap. Let's tell people about your book. Tell people where they can find it, and finally, where we can find you.
Okay. So again, my book, A Season in Lights. It's a story of passion, ambition, and escape in the underworld off Broadway. We didn't get to this on it, but an interesting aspect of it is the end of the novel coincides with the very beginning of the COVID pandemic and the shutdown of Broadway and how that affects the characters. So,
okay, timing.
It became very timely. I pretty much had the book completely written before that, and then wrote a new ending just as events were happening. And you can find it anywhere books are sold. Bookstores can, special order it if they don't have it in stock. Amazon, of course. My website is in the chat below. Gregory,
I'm putting it up there for everybody to actually go. It's Gregory Eric Phillips.
And Eric is spelled the German way, Erich. And this and all my books are on there, and that's where you can find me. I'm also very active on Facebook, so look me up there. It's also Gregory Eric Phillips on both Facebook and Instagram.
Fair enough. All right, let's get to wrapping up. So if you want to support this podcast, you can do so a number of different ways. My current release is called Alice 1. It's Alice in Wonderland in Greek mythology. Alice is Pandora. In this story, she chases the Queen of Hearts over the edge of the world and ends up in the Greek underworld. To do so, to escape, she must play Jason of the Argonauts a game of croquet. Inside the labyrinth in the underworld, Alice and company encounter gods, monsters, and perhaps the most terrifying thing of all, themselves. Written by yours truly, illustrated by Kenzie Carr. It's a fun book. I really enjoyed writing it. You can definitely hit the like, follow button here. Tomorrow is going to be really cool, folks. It's a drink and draw night. I'll be drawing, and my guest, Timothy Niederreiter, will be putting some models together, so it's going to be a fun little night. Anyway, thanks, Greg, for coming. To everybody watching, listening, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Stay inspired. Keep shining in the dark, and I will see you guys tomorrow.